Hey Creepaholics crew, grab your flashlights. Lock those doors tight as we head on down the dark and eerie trail together, as we explore another chilling tale. In today's episode, we're deep diving into the haunting case of the Weepy Voice Killer. I'm your host Shanice, and tonight we'll uncover the story of a man whose anguish, remorseful calls to 911 left a terrifying legacy. What drove him to commit these heinous crimes? Let's find out, shall we? Paul Michael Stephanie was born on September 8, 1944, in Austin, Minnesota. He was the youngest of 10 children in a devoutly Catholic family. The household was dominated by his strict father, whose harsh discipline left a profound impact on young Paul. Growing up in a home marked by emotional and physical abuse, Paul developed a deepened issue that would follow him into adulthood. Despite these difficulties, Paul managed to graduate from high school and moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, where he sought employment. His adult life, however, was marked by instability. He struggled to maintain steady employment and relationships, resulting in a series of short-lived jobs and failed marriages. The emotional turmoil of his upbringing continued to fester, eventually manifesting into violent and deadly ways. January 1st, 1981. The new year began with terror for 20-year-old Karen Potok. On the cold night of January 1st, 1981, Karen was out celebrating with her friends in St. Paul, Minnesota. After becoming separated from her group, she found herself alone and vulnerable. It was then that Paul Michael Stephanie, driving around in search of a victim, spotted her. Offering her a ride, Stephanie lured Karen into his car. He drove her to the remote industrial area and attacked her with a tire iron, brutally beating her until she was barely conscious. Miraculously, Karen survived the assault, but her injuries were severe. Paul, however, was not finished. He made his first eerie phone call to 911, his voice trembling.
This is an emergency. Please send a squad to Pierce Butler Road, Molenbeek Manufacturing Company, machine shop. Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
Can you tell me what happened to her?
Just hurry. She's laying on the ground in the back by the railroad tracks, by the ATM. Hurry.
What's the address?
I don't know.
Who are you?
Karen was left to be discovered by passerbyers and rushed to the hospital. But the trauma of the attack left her with little memory of her assailant. The police had no leads other than the haunting phone call, which provided no useful information. The case, for the moment, went cold. The second victim, on June 3rd, 1981, was Kimberly Compton. Paul's killing spree was just beginning. Kimberly Compton, an 18-year-old woman from Pepin, Wisconsin. Kimberly had just graduated from high school and was excited to start her new life in St. Paul. On June 3rd, 1981, just hours after arriving in the city, she was approached by Paul at a bus stop. Paul, appearing friendly and trustworthy, offered Kimberly a ride, which she accepted. However, instead of taking her to her destination, Paul drove her to a secluded area where he attacked her with an ice pick. After stabbing her repeatedly, and after the murder, Paul made another phone call to 911, his voice once again filling with remorse and the weepy, high-pitched tone.
You find me, I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody.
Kimberly's body was found shortly after the phone call, and the brutality and nature of this crime shocked the community. The connection between Kimberly's murder and the earlier attack on Karen Potok became evident, but the police were still unable to identify the perpetrator. The media dubbed the unknown assailant as the Weepy Voice Killer, referring to the distraught tone in his 911 calls. A year after Kimberly Compton's murder, Paul struck again, this time targeting 33-year-old Kathleen Graining. Kathleen was a schoolteacher living in Roseville, Minnesota. Unlike his previous victims, Kathleen was an acquaintance of Paul, which marked a departure for his unusual pattern. On July 21, 1982, Kathleen was found dead in her bathtub under suspicious circumstances. While her death was initially not linked to the Weepy Voice Killer, later investigations revealed that Paul had visited her that night, right before her death. There was no 911 call after Kathleen's murder, though, which led to the initial confusion amongst investigators about whether it was connected to the other cases. However, the similarities in nature of the attack and Paul's known connection to Kathleen eventually led them to the conclusion that she was indeed one of his victims. On August 6, 1982, Barbara Simmons was a 40-year-old nurse from Minneapolis. On August 6th, Barbara was out at a bar enjoying a night out where she met Paul. The two struck up a conversation and Barbara was feeling comfortable, so she decided to accept his offer for a ride home. Tragically, instead of taking her home, Paul drove Barbara to a secluded area, stabbed her multiple times, leaving her to die. Once again, Paul made his notorious 911 phone call, with his voice trembling as he confessed to the murder.
Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I ever stabbed her. I'm so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every night. I can't believe it's just a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself to get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else.
Barbara's body was discovered the next day, and the police immediately connected her murder to the Weepy Voice Killer. The brutality of the attack, combined with Paul's eerie phone calls, heightened public fear and media attention. The police were under intense pressure to capture the killer before he could strike again. Paul's killing spree would come to an end on August 21, 1982, when he targeted Denise Williams, a young woman working as a sex worker in St. Paul. Unlike his previous victims, Denise was not an easy target. She fought back fiercely when Paul attacked her with a screwdriver, inflicting wounds on him during the struggle. Injured and desperate, Paul made his final 911 phone call, still using his trademark weepy voice, but this time it was a plea for help.
I'm sorry I killed her too. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over Facebook. I don't know what the matter is. I'm going to kill myself, I think. Where are you? I said when the guys with the root shit on it's me. I killed all this.
This time, the police were able to trace the phone call, leading them directly to Paul, who was arrested shortly thereafter. During his trial, the recordings of his 911 phone calls were played in court, providing chilling evidence in his crimes and his apparent remorse. Paul was convicted of multiple counts of murder and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He would die of cancer in 1998. But the legacy of his crimes and the haunting 911 calls he had made will continue to linger in the public's conscious. Throughout the investigation and trial, experts and law enforcement officers struggled to understand the dual nature of Paul's actions. On one hand, he was a cold-blooded killer, committing brutal crimes without hesitation. But on the other hand, his tearful, remorseful phone calls suggested a man who was tormented by his actions. Some psychologists theorized that Paul may have suffered from a severe mental disorder, possibly disassociating himself with identity. which could explain the disconnection between his violent actions and his apparent remorse. Others speculated that his abusive childhood left him with a deep feeling of guilt and self-loathing, which he was unable to reconcile with, leading to his violent outbursts. The police also faced challenges in understanding the full scope of Paul's crimes. While he confessed to several murders, there was always the lingering question of whether or not there were other victims. Were there other ones that weren't discovered yet, that may be connected to him? The fact that Kathleen's murder initially was unnoticed as part of his pattern suggests that there may be other cases out there that have not been solved yet. The case of the Weepy Voice Killer captivated the media and the public. The bizarre nature of his 911 phone calls made a sensational headline, and the public was both horrified and fascinated by the story. Newspapers across the country ran stories about the mysterious killer who had called the police to confess to his crimes, in a tearful voice, creating a chilling narrative that gripped the nation. The case was also featured in several true crime documentaries and television shows, further cementing Paul's infamy. The recordings of his 911 phone calls with his trembling, remorseful voice has been replayed countless times, becoming one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Despite the horror of his crimes, there was always a strange sense of pity for Paul, a man who seemed to be battling his own demons as much as he was attacking his victims. In the years following Paul's arrest and conviction, the case of the Weepy Voice Killer has been revisited by both law enforcement and true crime enthusiasts. While all of Paul's known victims have been identified, some investigators believe that there are many more victims to be found. The legacy of the Weepy Voice Killer remains a chilling reminder of the complexity of human nature, the dual capacity for both cruelty and regret. Paul's case continues to be studied by psychologists, criminologists, and those fascinated by the dark aspects of the human psyche. For the families of the victims, the pain of their loss is compounded by the bizarre nature of this case and the lingering question of why did Paul commit these acts? Until next time, keep your hearts open, your minds alert as we unravel more chilling tales in the next episode. Until then, keep those flashlights handy and keep shining the light in the shadows. And remember, keep creeping it real. Creepaholics crew. Goodbye for now.